I'm troubled by the fact that, in a couple of points, if you look at this timeline, as you reported at 3:53, the command center called 911 to report the derailment and said that there were no injuries. And yet, 2 minutes later, there was a call from a Metro employee to request an ambulance. And the emergency response resources showed up at 3:57, a couple minutes after that. But then evacuation of passengers didn't begin until 4:26. And I think we need to be clear about why there was that delay from the time, both the fact that there were no injuries reported, and then there were 23 people, I think, who were sent to area hospitals, and then why there was this delay in evacuating passengers. And I believe the injuries were all in the last two cars. Is that correct?
Yes, the timeline, the first call that went out was approximately 8 minutes after the derailment. During that time, the train operator and the mechanic were instructed to tie down their train. The passengers from the first 4 cars were being evacuated. The car mechanic was sent to the rear 2 cars to verify what had derailed, and he went into the car and determined if anybody was seriously injured. He called back to OCC and reported that there were no injuries at that time. The second call that came in was from a passenger from the first 4 cars that had walked off the train up to the station platform, upstairs to the kiosk, and reported that he was injured to a Metro Rail employee at the kiosk. That was the second 911 call. The time between when the emergency response showed up on scene and when the passenger evacuation started, we felt was necessary because they needed to have appropriate resources available there, since the people were going to be evacuated to the track, and they needed to make sure that no injuries were caused during the evacuation. Everybody from the rear 2 cars, everybody from the whole train walked off the train, and then they were evaluated on the platform. And there is when they determined that 23 people were injured, and they were taken to area hospitals.
But did we interview any of the passengers?
No, we didn't.
So our information on the sequence of events is based on interviews with Metro employees?
Not interviews. We got transcripts of the OCC radio calls and telephone calls that are recorded, and the fire department logs of the same thing, the telephone and radio calls that are recorded. We reviewed those. And then we also reviewed the police reports that were done after the accident.
So we don't really know how the Metro employee, how he determined that there were no injuries.
He reported, he was told by OCC to go to the rear 2 cars and board it and check for injuries. And then he called back to OCC and told OCC that there were no injuries.
Did we interview that person?
The mechanic? We interviewed him as far as the derailment, not emergency response.
Okay. I mean, I recognize that, we don't have a lot of information here, but I think there's been a history of problems in the past with emergency response in the city overall. And, this is the nation's capital. I think, again, these are precursor events. Fortunately, nobody was seriously injured here, but I'm continuing to be troubled by the fact that it took that long to evacuate people when all the injuries were in the last 2 cars. Again, they weren't life-threatening, but that does strike me as a very long period of time to get people off. I mean, what time did they shut down the power to the tracks?
The power was shut off immediately after the derailment because the train, when it derailed, it shorted out the circuit breaker. When the fire department got on scene, one of their procedures is to verify that the power is down, make sure there's no stray currents from the wreckage or from anywhere else that's being jumpered to the area they're in. So one of the procedures is to double check, make sure the power is down.
And they got on scene at 3:57, is that right?
I'm sorry, say again?
The fire and emergency response were on scene at 3:57.
3:57 is when they began dispatching their resources to the scene.
But yet it still took more than almost 30 minutes before they began evacuating people, and then another almost 50 minutes before everybody was off the last 2 cars.
Yes.
We felt that they followed the procedures. They have procedures established to coordinate with each other, that if there is a derailment, and that if they do have to take passengers, from the cars onto the track, that they would coordinate with the fire department. They would make sure that it was safe before they take the passengers down and out. We felt that they coordinated as their procedures required, felt that everything was reasonable with what they did. We felt that it was a much different situation than had there been a fire or some other type of an emergency where you really had to get the people out quick. So we felt that going through the process that they had in place ahead of time, it was a derailment. The front part of the train was at the platform. The passengers from the first 4 cars were able to walk off, and then they followed proper procedures to go back and make sure everything was safe and help the passengers off the last 2 cars in a safe manner. So staff didn't see any emergency response safety issues that we believed that we needed to pursue on this accident.
Do we know whether, is there a standard time that is the city, that they expect to be able to evacuate passengers in an emergency situation?
No, I think it depends more on the situation. There's a certain things that have to be done before an evacuation takes place. So it's not dependent on the time, it's dependent on the situation.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think I can.
Thank you. Member Cheelander.
Just to follow up on a little bit of that, the initial injury report that the mechanic gave of no injuries was broadcast to his dispatch center or whomever, right? Or
Yes,
operations center.
Yes.
And then 2 minutes later, the passenger from one of the forward cars got out someplace and made it known that they were injured. So these are 2 separate reports of injuries.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The 23 that were injured, did any of those need an ambulance or EMT?
All 23 were transported to area by ambulance.
So, and they were on the rear cars?
Not all of them. Some of them were from the first 4 cars.
Okay.
They were throughout the train.
Do you know how they were divided up?
No, sir.
So the initial assessment by the mechanic of the rear car that was in the derailment of no injuries is probably a good assessment because these people came from other locations and were later determined to have injuries.
Yes, sir.
Right. Do you know what kind of injuries they had?
Scrapes and bumps.
Okay, just kind of being thrown around inside a
Yes, sir.
vehicle that's stopping quickly,
Yes.
unexpectedly. The evacuation decision, is it procedural at WMATA to, if there's no impending danger, like fire, smoke, and so forth, that you take a measured response to evacuation? In other words, you don't hurry people off of someplace until you know it's some off, third rail shut down, that kind of thing, before you take them off, which is why they in that car until for however many minutes that were, 26.
Yes, their standard operating procedure requires that the fire department be present, third power be verified down, and that they have appropriate resources to help guide the people as they walk on the track.
Is it fair to say that if they had fire or smoke or impending danger, that they probably would have evacuated them sooner?
Yes, they do specify if there's smoke, fire, or life-threatening injuries, then an immediate evacuation will take place.
So it was a conscious decision per their procedures to wait and make sure it was safe before they took them off because there was no impending peril.
Yes, sir.
That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Cheelander. I think both Member Higgins and Member Cheelander bring up some excellent points. One, there is some time issues. Two, in this particular case, it appeared that they were in compliance with their procedures. Do they have procedures concerning these kinds of emergency events?
Yes, sir.
And you looked at them.
Yes.
And in your judgment, and in the judgment of the investigative team, they were in compliance under the circumstances that this particular accident presented to us.
Yes, staff believes they followed the procedures.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. While